welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Henry D. Groot, a union organizer. Henry, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So you mentioned that you are a union organizer. Tell us a little bit about that. What is your major role and so forth?
So I'm the organizing director for USCW Local 1445, which is the Food and Commercial Workers Union. Mm-hmm. So we represent, our local has about 6,000 members at Stop and Shop. Mm-hmm. And we also represent meatpacking workers, some healthcare workers, and some food service workers. And we also represent cannabis workers. So it's a new industry, obviously. And so we represent workers that grow cannabis, that mm-hmm. produce it, like roll it or extract it into the different products. Mm-hmm. And then also the retail side, people who deliver or run the retail positions. And so I'm the organizing director. So I mostly oversee what we call new organizing. So bringing new members into the union mm-hmm. and sort of transitioning them until they get their first contract. And then once they get their first, union agreement, then it's sort of out of my hands and into another department.
That's beautiful. I want to start first with, since cannabis is recently introduced to Massachusetts and made legal and so forth, how is the progression of that industry here in Massachusetts? And how are workers fitting into that without any contradictions from the public, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's a heavily regulated industry. It took a while to get set up. I'm not exactly sure when recreational was legalized, but shops didn't open for quite a while after that. And because of the federal restrictions, there's some interesting sort of unique characters to the industry. One is that a lot of the money comes from sort of individuals, sort of small business people who made their money elsewhere and have enough to set up. Like in Massachusetts, you can have a company can own a grow and production facility, and then they can own 3 retail. So we work at companies that have, 4 sites, 3 retail and 1 production grow. In Florida, those same companies have upwards of 60 or 70 locations, right? So it's limited here. So because of that, there are these large multi-state operators that are often backed by venture capital. It's kind of shady. And then there's also, just a lot of just sort of random, small, medium-sized businessmen and women who've been able to, they have to basically do everything in cash. That's my understanding, or the majority of things, and they can't get loans. So they have to, if it's not like literal paper cash, mm-hmm. then it is, digital cash, right? They're not able to use loans. But it's been quite a it's expensive to get into the industry, but it's also been very profitable. Weed is ultimately, or cannabis is ultimately, I don't know if scientifically it's a weed, but, the reason why it's been expensive on the black market for a long time is not because it's hard to grow, but because it's hard to grow legally when you have to do so either outside in a different state and transport it, or indoor and pay the rent and, keep that hidden. So now they have these, massive facilities with, maybe 3 layers of plants growing on top of each other and automated, water system.
I'm glad you touched this area. I want to speak on it for a little bit. What about those people who think we're incarcerated for so many years for just having a few ounces of marijuana or whatever the case may be? Now it's legal here in Massachusetts. Don't you think that those people should be freed from prison? I mean, how could you got something legal now and people still doing hard time in prison for the same product? What do you think about that?
I think the war on drugs was unjust and a failure. Only I think it's sort of slightly incorrect to call it a failure, because by design, the people who designed the war on drugs, they didn't design it to control drugs. They designed it to control minorities and the left in this country. And there's a great quote from, I think, Ehrlichman, who was an advisor to Nixon, about why they launched the war on drugs. And he says very explicitly that that's the reason. So in that, with that mindset, it's actually been a tremendous success for the ruling class to be able to
Yes.
marginalize a large section of society. But in terms of having safe drug policy, it's been, just an absolute criminal failure and wrecked the lives of countless people across multiple countries. So there is some sort of justice and restitution that is written into the legislation. So there are sort of minority, like carve-outs for minorities and also for victims of the war on drugs. I think there has been, some pardons of nonviolent drug offenders, but I'm not an expert in that field, so I couldn't tell you the exact status. But we should free all nonviolent drug offenders.
Yes, because sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the reality, though, is that the industry is still largely either criminals who never got caught and were in the upper levels, or the hedge fund people, or a mix of those. And there are a lot of, maybe not people who got arrested, but people who were in the black market. You go to any grow facility and you'll meet people who were involved, not everybody, but some, and they're real experts in the technique of the industry. Often the management, they don't know really how to grow these plants. And it's people who develop their skills in the black market. And they're not really fairly compensated. I mean, a lot of facilities that aren't union are paying $16, $17, $18 an hour, which, maybe versus 5 years ago is nice, but compared to today, it's not a living wage, and it's not enough to pay rent anywhere in Boston or near Boston. And so what we're able to achieve is raising that pay, getting people protections on the job, protections from, it's still sort of a bit of a Wild West. I mean, we had managers at one of the sites we were organizing, just first of all saying horrific things, threatening employees, also literally microdosing, like on mushrooms while they were there. And there's still a lot of drugs and illicit activity that goes on in the legal side of the industry as well. I'll leave it there for now.
I never first understand in the first place, though, why they had made it so illegal. They had painted such a bad picture on marijuana. And I've been hearing for many, many years that it has so much medical values to it that people were getting healed in different forms and different ways. But, when the system brands something, is well branded. And looking at tobacco, who had been causing so many lives over the years compared to marijuana, that has medical values. Now you're manufacturing lotions from it. They are doing all kinds of things with the same product. And only to know that this same very product was the beast that caused people to be in prison for so many years. And that is something that I often just couldn't figure out why the system would have sentenced so many people to prison over the product, over this marijuana thing.
Yeah, I mean, the system's corrupt, and, every one of our loved ones who was detained or is detained is another number. If you're running a private prison, that's a customer, right? That's a contract. And every joint that's smoked, instead of, you have chronic pain, instead of going to to your doctor to get a prescription for some pain medicine, you're just using marijuana because it's like more effective, safer, and cheaper. That's profits that the pharmaceutical companies aren't able to enjoy. And again, just going back to like the Ehrlichman quote, it's not. I would say don't confuse evil with stupidity, right? Like it's not a stupid policy. It was an evil policy that worked the way that the people who wanted it to work designed it. And so but that means it's been a terrible travesty of injustice. But it certainly, it was never intended to be, some sort of scientific policy to fix our drug use, and we do have, bad, obviously, addiction problems.
Yes.
But it was about social control. So I think that's important because then we can really understand it. It doesn't seem like, insanity. Then we can actually locate who's benefiting from this injustice and how can we, where do they live? Where do they operate? Where are they headquartered? How can we push back against them? And why? Why do they want that? And ultimately it's about protecting the larger capitalist system from protest and unrest and calls for change.
Okay. I want to go over now to Stop and Shop. And I'm speaking subject to correction here, right? I think it was either 3 or 4 years ago, Stop and Shop staff members, or employees rather, had strike. As I said, I'm speaking to subject to correction, but I'm quite sure that it was those employees who had strike for benefits, wages, and so forth. They were underpaid. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that was, you have a great memory. So the Stop and Shop workers, I think it was over 20,000 workers, or maybe it was 11,000 workers or something like that. But a large number, not only at our local, which covers much of Massachusetts, all of New Hampshire and Maine, but also I think it was throughout New England or even the Northeast. So several of our sister locals that also represent thousands of Stop and Shop workers all went out on a coordinated strike. I think it was April 11th, 2019, strike for 11 days. But I only came to this position recently. I was involved in different work. It wasn't really, sort of behind the scenes running things. I did go out. I just happened to be out at Stop and Shop on the line, walk solidarity, not because I had this position. I think it shows the power that working people have when we come together, right? That this is a massive company owned by, a multi-billionaire family, and the workers, they are working every day to create profits, to serve thousands and thousands of people, to feed thousands and thousands of people, and to create profits for the family that owns that business. And but they're really disrespected. They're seen as, just basically another widget, just like any of the other products that Stop and Shop management has to buy, right? They buy their cleaning supplies, they buy their inventory, and they purchase the labor. They employ these workers. But unlike mops or, soap or, ground beef, humans, workers have consciousness, and we can fight back against the boss. So I think, maybe these workers who aren't always, during the pandemic, there was more of a sort of lionization of essential workers. But before that, really nobody, thought much about a lot of these workers, sort of ignored them, and society certainly ignored them. But we show that actually these are the people that are feeding us, or an important part of the food chain. And so their power on the strike line was able to win serious gains in their conditions and to protect the tax from the company. And so I think we're seeing all over this country, working people start to come into their own, to feel their power collectively, that we're not going to take on the system as individuals, which is how it wants us to deal with the system. Get a better job, save more, get an education. Those things are all fine to do, but ultimately you can't lift up the whole working class through individual, reforms. And so it's only through collective mobilization, and ultimately the union and strike action is the sharpest weapon, the tip of the spear in the fight against the billionaire class, because we can actually disrupt their ability to make profits.
Do you think that these large multi-billion-dollar corporations should have some form of responsibility to those who work more than 5 years to their company? Do you think government should make it mandatory that at least a percentage of their profits should go towards profit sharing among those employees? I mean, think of it. You've worked your life for a company and you're worth nothing. They tell you go to school, get a great education. Then when you get your great education, you end up with a big student bill. Then when you go to work, you're getting enough just to get you to work and back home, but nothing to hardly pay back your student loan in first place. So don't you think that government should make it mandatory that to all those large multi-billion-dollar corporations who have been running for so many years, at least have an obligation to its employees to say, well, look, they should partake in some profit sharing. Whether it's 1% or 2%, I think you would have contributed your life to their company. You would have made that company a company. While they get to enjoy their billions of dollars in profits and flying nice planes and riding nice yachts, I think these employees, the little among them, the subordinates, they should be entitled to some kind of benefits. What would you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, I don't care whether it's a mom and pop store with 2 employees, 3 employees, or a multi-billion-dollar company. At the minimum, if people are working 40 hours a week to help run that facility, they should have their basic needs met. And a certain, I think, is about $22 just for one adult with no children, maybe 24. The MIT living wage calculator is a good metric to use. And it's going up, obviously. So, to have our healthcare needs met, our housing needs met, to have time to relax, recharge, spend time with our save for retirement, right? So that's as a minimum, every single worker, and you can call it profit sharing, you can do a share, but ultimately wages come from profits, right? A dollar that I'm not paid, a dollar that my wage is cut, or a dollar extra that I'm getting I don't really care about the mechanism, but I think as a baseline. But I would say, in our capitalistic society, it is inevitable that even if you are able to establish protections for workers, and we see this over the last 50 years of history, that the corporations will launch a counteroffensive and erode them, and that the tendency towards monopolization, the tendency towards large corporations to merge and become even mega corporations that have an incredible amount of economic power and also social and political power that buy and sell politicians essentially and basically fund the writing of their own regulations, that's a tendency that is built into the system. And so we can and should and will establish, a living minimum for these corporations, but ultimately we need to take these large corporations into public ownership and worker control. We need to nationalize, at least the Fortune 500 companies and certainly multi-billion-dollar companies to run them in the interest of society and not for the profit interest of a handful of, mega rich, 0.1%. So I would say that, a living wage absolutely is a baseline, but ultimately we need a fundamental transformation of society by taking over private corporations and taking them into the public interest so that they're existing not to, right, like Stop and Shop or any other private firm doesn't exist to deliver food at a affordable and convenient rate to its customers. It exists to make profits. right? And we don't need grocery stores that exist to make profits. We need grocery stores to feed people, right? To be a warehouse of receiving product, making it accessible, making sure that it's stored in a healthy manner with the right temperatures and that it's expired, it's removed, right? That's the role of a grocery store. That's the function that it plays in society, not to make profits for somebody so they can buy their sixth yacht. And that goes for any, large corporation, and I would say also medium and maybe even small corporations, that they should be run in the public interest, and that we call that socialism.
Yes. I want to touch a little bit on healthcare, because I find that there are these, as I said, these multi-billion-dollar corporations. We have in the insurance plans, basic, then we have the silver plan and the gold plan, whatever tiers they are. But yet still, with your little salary or little wage that you get, you barely can afford a basic plan, which just don't really give you any coverage, so to speak. And you end up in a bad critical situation in your life. You end up owing the hospital lots of money. Should you think that these corporations or insurance healthcare, the healthcare structure, should design their plans in such a way that down to the smallest employee can still have adequate coverage, that in the event that something dramatically happened to their lives, they can still go to a hospital without coming out with a massive medical bill? What would you have to say about that?
I mean, every other industrialized country in the world, we're the richest country in the history of human civilization, and we apparently can't afford to provide everybody with universal access to healthcare, right? Which is not free. It's something that we would pay through our taxes. We already fund, a large amount of public healthcare through our taxes at a very expensive rate because we're not able to negotiate, prices for prescription drugs and so forth. So we have here in Boston the best healthcare system in the world if you have money. And a lot of workers can't afford it. So as a union, we're very proud that we have our own health and welfare fund that we try to bring workers into because they get cheaper access, or even, they're not paying anything for really strong union healthcare with low, deductibles and copays, et cetera, and great coverage, great, healthcare providers. So, that's something that we can control, right? We want to fight to bring in, anybody who's working in retail or in food service, food processing, healthcare, all the industries that we cover, cannabis, into that, right? As a step that we can control on sort of the medium level, right? Not of individuals, but, 10 workers at a time, 100, 200 workers at a time, 1,000 workers at a time. But ultimately, as a society, we should follow every other country in the world in providing universal health care, so that our tax dollars that we pay every year and every day when we go and, buy something, you're paying sales tax. We're paying property tax. Even if you pay rent, you're funding your landlord's property tax payment. And that money, and not our income tax, of course, that money's going to purchase jets and bombs and, fund phony deals between military contractors and lobbyists and politicians, instead of just going to pay for healthcare when it would be far cheaper and more affordable. So ultimately, I would love to see, and as a union, if we didn't have to fight so much to give our members healthcare because it was already provided, then we could push for, higher wages and better work-life balance and other things that would also be very meaningful. So I think it would really be in our best interest to not be in the business of fighting for healthcare, to already have it established as a minimum. And we see that in every other country that's comparable with the United States, they're able to make that work with no problem. So I think it's, of all the industries that shouldn't be run for profit, obviously taking care of people, saving their lives is the most obvious one. And we have amazing, the workers themselves who work in that industry, including the ones that we represent. These are people who wake up every morning to help save lives, to take care of people from, pregnancy through all the way to death. They are there to support people, to support families, to provide essential care services, cleaning people when they, can't take care of themselves. I mean, really intimate care that it is, it's one thing to talk about it on this show. It's another to perform it every day. And those people aren't taken care of. And the system that they work in, even a lot of these hospitals are nonprofits, but the CEOs are making millions of dollars. And so it's really a corrupt and sick system that we have. And as a society, not only do we have, bad healthcare issues, but I think the health of our society is flawed too. And I think the healthcare system and the profit motive in that is like one of the most obvious symptoms that our society is corrupt.
Beautiful. I mean, we are coming to the last minute in our program, but there's something I would have loved to discuss with you. I don't know if we can get back at another show, interview, and potentially discuss it. But from the standpoint where billions of dollars are poured into external wars that really is not of the U.S., and we have people in this country who are actually funding that war through the taxpayers' dollar. But more importantly is that to have access to free healthcare, it doesn't exist. And I think America can make all its problems go away. I think the political system is structured badly. The people put them in governmental positions to represent them, and when they get to those points, they represent their own selves and couldn't care less about the people. I would love to know if there's any way that you think eventually that your union could try to encourage the American people to think more firmly about having free health care, considering the amount of billions and billions of dollars that are poured into other countries every year, and taxpayers paying both for